Hello, this is Selmer. Um, I'm going to keep this short as the lack of good players made it hard to evaluate combat, and I only have a few definitive gripes I need to get off my chest. First of all, I quite like the game. The actual match structure is great, the main issues I have being the low amount of PvP throughout most of the match, which will presumably be fixed in the full release through the sigil system, as that's meant to allow you to customize your playstyle, including win conditions, letting you tilt the game further towards PvE, co-op, or PvP. As well, I found that the 1v1v1 structure of the final battles uh, to be unsuitable for the Duskbloods combat, as the developers have somehow managed to create a combat system where being ganked is even more oppressive than it was in Elden Ring. Besides that, I only have minor nitpicks, which I don't think are worth sharing, at least when it comes to the Dusk Battles game mode itself. My main complaints relate to the combat and specifically how it affects PvP. Most of the new mechanics, as well as the increased power level of the Bloodsworn themselves when using running attacks, for example, which allow for easy neutral skips serve to severely simplify PvP and lower potential skill expression. My argument is that these new mechanics, instead of adding depth, take it away by being simple and strong, and thus taking the importance away from the most fundamental and deepest skill of Souls PvP, namely footsies, or just spacing, as Souls players tend to call it. And the increased strength of things like running attacks help to skip neutral and, by extension, footsies. Surprisingly, the jumps, new abilities, and universal ranged attacks don't seem to do that much damage to the game, as you seem to no longer be able to reaction jump over melee attacks. Guns seem to serve mainly as chip to prevent stalling or punish things like healing at range, and the abilities are all limited in use. Other issues are the block being too strong, though I don't think the inclusion of universal blocking is a bad thing per se. It just seems poorly balanced right now. The strength of blocking, however, compounds with the inclusion of universal hyper armor on the guard counters, which I have yet to make up my mind up about, but will presumably at best be a non-issue, and at worst devolve the game into a mindless rock paper scissors match. Another mechanic that I suppose also compounds into the strength of the shield in this game is the inclusion of perfect blocks, which I have yet to see as I made no attempt to use them and which I never saw anyone else manage a successful attempt at. My issue with the mechanic is that the only way I can imagine them working is negating some of the stamina penalties of blocking, which is already an issue on its own due to the established strength of blocks in general, but has the potential to compound once again with the new guard counters in a similar manner to something seen in Elden Ring, where using the deflect physic, players would equip a weapon with a good guard counter like CGS, Curved Greatsword, and instead of deflecting with the weapon, use a shield in the offhand, so that even if the deflect attempt failed, the attempt would still block the incoming attack. A successful deflect would not only eliminate the stamina usage of defense, but also negate the chip damage of weapons like scythes, making it incredibly broken for turtling. This style of build went almost completely unknown by the wider community, but was and is a real issue in Elden Ring. It should also be noted that the shields in Duskbloods don't take chip damage, only stance damage through the block. So, it should be obvious that the situation I described in Elden Ring is eerily similar to how shields work in the Duskbloods, and the potential for a similar turtle playstyle to dominate is real. This would also further degrade play into simple hard reads, at least in theory. Another potential problem is the inclusion of a universal ranged parry. FromSoft has never been able to design a parry that was not a detriment to the PvP in any Souls game, and so while I had very few experiences with this mechanic in the game, by comparing it to similar despised tools like Golden Parry in Elden Ring, or Gun Parries in Bloodborne, we can somewhat confidently assume it's going to be a detriment to the game here too, as it shares a lot of similar properties with those abilities, namely the potential for instant kills for a simple hard read, or in this case, a few simple hard reads, especially problematic because they're defensive hard reads. That being that the defender has to make a read on his opponent and is thus able to insta kill his opponent, which makes it a lot worse than offense because it encourages passivity. As well as the fact that it is a ranged parry, it lets you space your opponent's attacks such that even if the parry fails, you will not be punished. But the howl has another feature that renders it being ranged mostly a moot point. The fact that even if it does not interact with an attack, it still stuns the opponent if he is in range. I don't have much to say about that. It's just so obviously retarded that I don't feel the need to explain why it's bad. And finally, I want to say that I understand why the developers chose to simplify the combat. In many of my matches, fights would start with me winning one neutral interaction, after which began a cycle of hard reads on the opponent's part that would usually lead to them dying without ever returning to neutral. Now, you might say that it's a skill issue, and you're probably right, but a lot of people are going to play this game for the PvE, and like Souls PvEers do. What? Oh, I forgot to type in. Okay. And like Souls PvEers tend to do, refuse to ever improve at dueling. If the combat was more skill-based, it would allow experienced PvPers to stomp everyone else even harder than is already the case, and defeat one of the fundamental design pillars of the game, which was to let players win with the playstyle they want, PvE or PvP. It's still my biggest gripe, however, the simplification of combat that is, and I would like to see it reworked to promote a bit more playing distance over mindless RPS, especially because multiplayer games like these heavily depend on being able to continually improve your skills, which obviously conflicts with trying to engineer a low skill ceiling in the manner From Software has done here, as being able to continually improve your skills is one of the, well, it's the main way multiplayer and live service games, you know, have longevity because you're going to be playing matches over and over again, and very soon you'll have seen everything the game has to offer in terms of visuals and, you know, novel mechanics. Mastery ends up being the only thing left, and having a low skill ceiling ruins that. Anyway, that's the video.